Hey everyone, welcome back to Hand Tools and Techniques. I'm Bob Rosieski. I'm glad you could be with me today because after several months of talking about it, we're going to be starting our project today. Now I'm pretty excited about it. I think it'll be a good project. I think it's going to be simple enough for folks that are new to the craft to be able to build the project and build some skills. But I also think that there's going to be enough challenging aspects to the project for folks with a little bit more experience, especially if you try and do as much of the project as you can with your hand tools. So the project we're going to be working on is a porringer top tea table, and it's a design that I came up with inspired by several different antique 18th century examples. Now the porringer top tea table is something that is pretty much associated with the Newport region. It's a pretty unique style tabletop, and it's usually paired up with turned legs, but I decided to tweak the design a little bit and go with a standard cabriole leg for the table. There are examples that are like this, even though they're not as common as the turn leg types. The apron is fairly simple, which is typical of the Newport style tables. Not real bold sweeping curves like you might find in a Connecticut or a Boston style table. So there's a PDF with some design notes attached to the blog post for the episode today. And you may find it helpful to download and print out that PDF file before watching the rest of the episode, because I'm going to be referring to it. I'm going to be using it sort of as my show notes today. And I'm going to be going through those design notes so that you can see how I came up with the design. And what it's also going to do is allow you to tweak or modify the scale of the table. Again, I scaled the table so that it would fit in a space that I have available for it. But you may find that you need a piece that's a little bit bigger, so you may want to scale it. And I think you'll see as you go through the design notes and as we go through today's episode that the way that the design was, the way I came up with the design, it's very easily adaptable to be able to scale this piece to any size that you really need. Okay, so I've come out to my family room because this is where the table is going to go. So this is where the design really needs to start. The table is designed so it's going to fit between these two chairs here. And I could go, and just build a standard size table. The problem with that is tables of the period were typically somewhere around 27 inches high for a tea table. That would put the top of that table right about here. Now that's fine for a 12 o'clock formal tea, but for Sunday afternoon casual beer, not exactly what I'm looking for. I want something that's a little bit lower, probably more close to the height of the arms of these chairs. So I'm going to scale the whole thing down so that it fits this space and that it matches this height. So we can essentially call it a mini tea table because it is going to be smaller than what a typical table would be. Now I could go ahead and start taking measurements of this space, but there's a much easier way to do this, and that's to use a story stick. So what I have here is just a scrap piece of wood, and how I'm going to start to design this table is I'm going to make a mark on the piece of wood, and I'm going to make it even with the height of the arms of my chair here, how high I want this table to be. Now once I have that mark on here, I can use that height and I'll base all the rest of the dimensions of the table off of the final table height. So I can take this back into the shop and we can finish the design. So the most critical dimension for the table that I'm going to build for my space is that total height that we just took from my family room. If you need a different, if you have a different dimension that's critical for your particular piece, you can use that based on the design notes and still be able to scale the piece based on that dimension. So for example, if the width for you is the critical dimension, you could take the width and scale everything off that, determine the height, and then scale everything based on the width and the height. The way that the design was, that I came up with the design, I based all the other dimensions off of the table's height. So everything is sort of proportioned to the total height of the table. So if we take a look at the first page of the design notes, we'll see how I came up with the overall dimensions of the piece. So we have the height that we just got from the height of the chair, the arms of the chair, and this is going to be the total height of the table. From here, we're going to reference all of our future marking off of the bottom end of the story stick. So this is the floor down here, and everything is going to be referenced from here. So how we're going to do this is now we're going to use proportions rather than measurements. I think what you're going to see in the way that I build this table is that there's going to be very little use of a ruler or any actual measuring. What you're going to see is a lot of use of these. The dividers are probably going to be the most important tool that I use for proportioning and figuring out the dimensions of the parts that I'm going to put into this table. So you're going to see a lot of these during the project series, and it's definitely something that you should have in your shop if you're going to be doing any type of building this way. I think building relative, which is basically just building building your table relative to one particular dimension, or making parts relative to other parts of the project. A pair of dividers is probably one of the most important tools you're going to use. So if we look at the first page of the design notes, I made a few notes here about just the general proportions of the table, the overall proportions. So we have the height, and if we look at the front elevation, it's a 1-to-1 square. So I can simply take a tri-square, transfer the height that we got earlier. So we have this height line here, and we can transfer that to the other side. And what you'll see on the design notes is that I made sort of diagrams of the story sticks on different parts of the drawing there. So we can transfer the total height to the total width, because that's going to be the same as the total height, because it's a 1-to-1 square. If we look at the side or the profile, that's a 2-to-3 rectangle, and the top drawing, the porringer top itself, or the plan drawing, is also a 2-to-3 rectangle. So to come up with that, what we want to do is we want to come up with a ratio of 2-to-3. Well, this is probably too big to go 2-to-3, but we can easily go 6-to-4. So we step off. So here's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So we set our divider so that 6 steps reaches our total height. Then we can step off 4. There's 1, 2, 3, 4. And we arrive at our 2-to-3 ratio, so we can make a mark here, as you see that I have already done, and get the total depth of our table. So what we now have is a stick that has measurements scribed into it for the total height of the table, the total width of the table, and the total depth of the table. Now we don't have to worry about taking a ruler. We can gauge all of those major dimensions right off of the story stick. If we go to the second page of the design notes, I talk a little bit more about some of more details of the elevation. And this is actually going to come into play for the side view as well. So we can locate the bottom apron. the apron is located 4/5 of the total height from the floor. Well, we know what the total height is, so what we want to do is divide that total height into fifths. So we can step off 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. No, I need to open that up a little bit. 1, 2, 3, 5. Okay, we'll close it slightly. Okay, so we now have divided the total height into 5. We can step off 4/5. So 1, 2, 3, 4. I made myself a little indentation there, so I can make a mark. Take my square and my marking knife. I'm going to scribe a line, and I'll darken it with my pen here so you can see it. Whoops. And this new mark here denotes the bottom of the apron. So here's our total height. Here is the bottom of the apron of the table. What that tells us is that this distance here is the height of the apron and the thickness of the top. So we can now come up with the thickness of the top by dividing this space into approximately into sixths, because I made the top thickness 1/6 of this height. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So you got to open it up just a little bit. I think that's it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So now I'm right on the total height. So we'll leave a mark. You can see that mark is right here. So we'll scribe that in. And I'm working on the height side of the story stick here. So I'll scribe that in. And we now have the thickness of our top here. The total table height, so here's the thickness, which means the apron is going to be that wide, this distance here. And we'll label this, here's the bottom of the apron, and here is the top of the apron. Now we can go along and kind of do a lot of these measurements the same way. So I think the next, so let's see, where are we? So we've come up with the top thickness and the height of the apron, the cove and the fillet. So if you look at the drawing, there's just a small scroll detail on the apron. There's a small cove with a fillet. Well, we can come up with the dimensions for that. And if you look, I said the height of the cove and the fillet of the apron, I made that 1/6 of the apron. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And a lot of this is, when you're drawing this out on paper, I'm not the type of designer that can just come up with an idea in my head and go right to cutting wood. I don't have that gift. I really need to get some sketches and some general proportions down on paper. And you don't typically need to go into this much detail. A lot of it is worked out as you go along. But I need to have some type of general drawing and some type of general proportions and dimensions so that I can get started. And doing this allows me to sort of see what the project is going to look like in 2 dimensions. And then I can make my story stick and then build the piece using a story stick. So we'll call this the height of cove and fillet. And then so then the next bullet says that the height of the cove is 3/4 the height. So we divide this little space here into 4. 3/4 of that is the height of the cove. 1/4 of that is the height of the fillet. Finally, the top projection, and this is going more towards the width now. So we can turn towards the width side, and we can actually put the projection. We're going to be able to put the projection of the top on here. And the projection is how much the top of the table overhangs past the knee, or past the outermost point that the leg reaches. So in this case, I designed it so that the total top projection, which is the projection on both sides, is 1/8 of the total table height. What that means is that on each side, we've got 1/16 of that total table height is the top projection. So what we can then do is take this total width, because the total width is the same as the total height, divide it into 16 segments, step off 1/16 for the top projection on this side, because again, we're working on the side of the story stick that corresponds to the width of the table now. And then we can step off 15/16, and that remaining 16th will be the projection of the top on the opposite side of the table. So I'm actually going to jump to the 4th page of the design notes now, which are the notes on designing the leg. Because we were already working on the width side of the story stick, talking about the top projection, I think it makes the most sense to just talk about the leg stock now, so that we can get a few more of these measurements in here. So the first thing that we talk about is that the width of the leg stock is equal to 1/8 of the total table height. So if you look at the picture of that cabriole leg there, the rectangle, the gray rectangle, not the shaded gray rectangle, but the gray line that defines the leg itself. That gray line rectangle is 1/8 of the total table height. So we can pencil that in, so we can step that off. Again, we already have this set up at a 1/16 for the top projection, so we can just step off 2 of those on each side. And that gives us the width of our legs. Can't quite see my mark. I think that's it, but I'll re-step it just to be certain. Yeah, that was it. So now we have the width of the legs defined. Now keep in mind that some of this, the leg itself will be cut away, but we're not at this point interested in the leg, in the dimensions of the leg, because we're not really going to put much of that on the story stick. We're just interested in the width of that leg stock, because putting in the width of that leg stock, okay, now allows us to come up with the width of the length of the apron. So here's the projection, these 2 outside marks here. See if we can see this a little better. So here, this mark way up at the top and this mark at the bottom denote the projection of the tabletop. This is the width of the leg stock. This is the width of the leg stock. And the distance between those 2 marks that delineate the width of the leg stock, this is the shoulder to shoulder length of the long apron. And what we're going to do is repeat those measurements on the other side. So again, we already have this set up. Remember, back on the first page, we figured out what the total depth was. This was 2/3 of the total height. So now we're going to repeat this. We already have this set up for a 1/16 of the height. So we mark out 1 there for top projection, and then step off an 1/8 for the leg stock. Then again here, we can step off a 1/16 for the projection and an 1/8 for the stock. And really what we can do on the bottom is just to transfer the marks that we've already made on the other side. That gives us our top projection, width of the leg stock. Move up here again, top projection, width of our leg stock. I'll draw these in just so you can see them. Okay, so again, here's the total depth of the table, which is the short dimension. Top projection, leg stock size, shoulder to shoulder distance of the small aprons. Now, you got to remember, we're going to have to add tenons to the aprons later on when we actually build this. So this is not the length of the apron stock, this is the shoulder to shoulder length of that apron, so not including the tenons. We're going to add tenons to this length later on when we build the table. Now, with regard to the leg itself, we can use a lot of different proportions to come up with the leg, the actual the leg template. Now, I've provided a half scale leg template on the second to last page. And that half scale leg template is actually, it's half scale for a table with a height of 21 inches, because that's about what the height needs to be for my table. Again, if you need to change that, your height, you're going to need to change all these dimensions of the leg, because everything is relative to the total table height. But the information in this, the design notes for the cabriole leg will allow you to do that. And I'll go through them quickly, but I'm not going to put them out on the story stick, because really what those proportions would be for is your leg template. So you're going to take a 1/4 inch piece of poplar or pine or whatever, 1/4 inch thick by the width of your leg stock that we figured out. So a 1/4 inch thick by this wide, by about the height of your table, and you're going to draw your leg template on there based on these proportions. So we'll go through them quickly, but again, I'm not going to draw these out. So we already said the width of the leg stock is an 1/8 of the total table height. That width, the width of the leg stock, is also the width of the leg at the knee, the peak of the knee, and also at the foot. So the foot is basically the full width of the leg stock, and the knee is basically the full width of the leg stock. The peak of the knee is a distance equal to 3/4 of the knee thickness from the bottom of the apron. So we take this dimension that we established for the stock of the leg, divide it into quarters, and then step down 3/4 from the bottom of the apron. So we established the bottom of the apron here. We step down 3/4 from there, and that's where the widest point of the knee is on this particular leg. The ankle is a distance 1/6 of the leg height from the floor. So we take this leg height, all right, and we said now the height of the leg itself is going to be the total height of the table minus the thickness of the tabletop. So from the floor to the top of the apron, that's also the leg height. We divide that height into sixths, and 1/6 of that distance is the height of the ankle from the floor. The ankle thickness is 2/5 of the knee thickness. Again, the leg stock thickness is what the knee thickness is, so 2/5 of this is the thickness of the ankle. The height of the foot, 1/3 of the foot diameter. Well, the foot diameter again is the same as the thickness of your leg stock. So we've come up with the thickness of that leg stock, divide that into thirds, and that defines the height of the foot from the floor. and the height of the pad is 1/4 of the height of the foot. So once we have the foot height established, divide that into fourths, and 1/4 of that is the height of the pad on the bottom. Inflection points. Now, an inflection point is where a curve transitions from a convex shape to a concave shape. So there are two main inflection points that we want to look at, and they're labeled A and B on this. A is what we're calling the outside inflection point. Now, this is the point at which the convex curve that starts at the leg block, at the leg, the leg block at the top. That curve starts there, and it's a convex curve until we hit point A. And at point A, that curve turns into a concave curve. It's not a curve with a constant radius. It is a changing radius. It's sort of elliptical, and it's a sweeping curve, but it is concave from point A all the way to the bottom of the foot, or the top of the foot, actually. So that particular inflection point where the curve transitions from convex to concave is a distance of 1/4 of the distance from the peak of the knee, which was 3/4 of the height down from the bottom of the apron. So from that distance, the peak of the knee to the ankle, we divide that by 4, and 1/4 of that distance from the peak of the knee to the ankle is where that inflection point A lies. Similarly, there's an inflection point at the back of the leg, so we start out with a concave curve from the bottom of the leg stock, or where the bottom of the knee block there is. We start off with a concave curve, and at inflection point B, that curve goes to convex until again we hit the foot. And that inflection point is 1/5 of the distance from the bottom of the knee block to the bottom of the ankle, to the ankle. And then the knee block itself, it's a square, and the height and the width is the same as the leg block, which I think I forgot to mention, but the part up at the top, the leg block itself, where the apron is going to tenon into, where the tenon of the apron is going to go into the mortise. This is the section where we're going to chop the mortise. The leg block itself is 2/3 the thickness. So here's the thickness of the leg stock divided into thirds. 2/3 of that is the width of this leg block. It's also the height and width of the knee block, the transition block here. The stock that we're going to use is also 2/3 of the thickness. So it's the same. And we're actually going to pull that piece from our leg stock, as you'll see later on when we start building this and dimensioning our rough stock for the legs. So the next page I'm going to go to is actually the third page, which is the top itself. And again, I'm not going to draw this out, but I'll just go through it briefly. And this is how I came up with the design for the porringer top. So I started out with that 2 to 3 rectangle that we defined earlier. I took 1/4 of the short dimension and 1/6 of the long dimension and drew a square, and you see that in step 1. I then made a semicircle, as you see in step 2, and the radius of that semicircle is actually tangent to the square. In step 3, what you see is the step back of the porringer top itself. So if you go to the first page and you actually look at the drawing of the porringer top, you'll see that after the semicircular corners, the top steps back some. Well, that step back is defined by where the semicircle intersects the diagonal of the square. Going over to step 4, you'll see there are actually these little points that jut out from the semicircle. And if you look at page 1, you'll see where those points fall on the final shaped tabletop. Well, those points are defined by going 1/2 of that step distance that we established in step 3. So we take 1/2 of that step, where a line 1/2 of a step back intersects the diagonal of the square, that defines the point. And we just have another 45-degree line comes from that point down to the step back, and then we draw that curve. We just sort of smooth it with a curve where it meets the step back. Okay, so there's some full-size templates of the porringer corners and the transition block, or the knee block, on the last page of the PDF. And again, these templates, these full-size templates, are for a table 21 inches high. If you want to scale that table up, then you can just simply use the dimensions and the proportions provided, and make your own drawing using those and a divider and a straight edge to scale everything up, and that'll allow you to make a pattern for your cabriole leg and your porringer corners and your knee block. If you want to make a table 21 inches high, which is about the height that I'm going to make my table, you can use the templates provided in the PDF. So the last thing I want to talk about are the tools that we're going to use to build the project. And on the, I guess it's the fourth or fifth page, there's a suggested tool list. Now, by no means are these the only tools that you can use. You can use any tools you want. You want to use power tools to build a project, go right ahead. I'm going to use all hand tools because that's what I use. Based on what I use, I'm suggesting some tools how I'm going to build this project. I came up with a suggested tool list, and I think what you'll see is that there really aren't going to be a lot of tools required to build the table. So it's another reason I think it's a good project for someone just getting started, is that you really don't need to make a huge investment in tools in order to build the piece. So let's talk about the tools that we're going to use briefly. We're going to need a 20 to 28 inch crosscut saw. I have here a Diston number 7. This is going to be for cross cutting our rough stock. You're also going to need a similarly sized rip saw. Here's mine. Again, this is going to be for ripping stock. You're going to need a back saw, preferably filed rip, anywhere from 10 to 14 inches or 10 to 16 inches. Preferably filed rip. We're going to be using this for doing our precision cross cutting, and you can cross cut with a rip filed saw. I find it easier than ripping with a cross cut filed saw. And we'll talk about that when we get started on a project. So a rip saw, preferably, a back saw, preferably filed ripped for tenons. And anything from 10 to 14 points per inch will work. A bow saw, turning saw, coping saw, whatever you have, something that's going to be able to cut some curves because there are a few curves in the project. Layout tools, and these are going to be tools that you're going to use on every project. Some type of ruler. I use a 2-foot folding ruler. A tri-square, something 9 to 12 inches, 9 to 12 inch blade would work. A marking knife. Mine also has an awl end to it. Marking and mortising gauge. You can use something like this combination gauge where you have a single pin on one side and adjustable pins on the other side. Or even better, if you have them, are dedicated gauges like these two that I made. This one is a single pin, which actually more of a knife, marking gauge. And then I have this mortise gauge where the pins are fixed at the width of my mortise chisel. Just makes setting the pins a little easier. But you don't have to have two dedicated gauges. You can use a single gauge like this one. A pair of dividers that we talked about already. These are going to be very important. Winding sticks. Talked about these a couple episodes ago. We're going to use these for truing up our stock. And a pencil. Planes. We're going to use a 4-plane or jack plane for our rough planing. This should be something from about between 14 and 20 inches long with an iron with a good heavy camber, because we're going to be taking real thick shavings with that. And then a tri-plane or joiner plane. This one's about 22 inches long. Anything from 22 to 26 inches will work. Again, cambered iron, but not as much camber as the 4-plane. Chisels, we're going to need a couple. First is a mortise chisel. So we're going to be making mortises So you're going to want a mortise chisel. Anything, whether it be, you're only going to need one. We're making, a pretty good sized mortise and tenon, so something in the neighborhood of 3/8 or 7/16 or 1/2 inch will work just fine. Mine's a 3/8 and it'll be plenty big enough for this table. A couple of bench chisels, something in the neighborhood of a 1/2 inch and a 1 inch. Don't have to be exactly those sizes, but something close to these sizes. For shaping, we're going to need a rasp and a file. I have a number 50 Nicholson Pattern Maker's rasp here. It's one of my favorites. It leaves a nice smooth finish, but also cuts pretty quick. And then just an 8-inch Nicholson bastard cut cabinet file. Some other tools that we're going to need: a mallet. You're not going to be able to chop mortises without a mallet. A brace and an auger bit. This is a number 4, something around a number 4, 5, 6, something in that neighborhood. We're going to be draw boring our tenon, so we need something to bore the peg holes. And we're going to need a brace in order to turn that bit. And it doesn't have to be a fancy wood brace like this. Any brace will do. We're going to need a glue brush and some glue. Now, whether you use hot hide glue or liquid hide glue, I use the Tight Bond liquid hide glue. I also use hot hide glue. Either one will work fine. I like hide glue. If you want to go ahead and use Tight Bond, regular PVA glue, that's up to you. I'm a big proponent of hide glue, so I'm going to be using either the liquid or I'll probably be using the hot glue, but either one will work. A card scraper with a concave edge, and this concave edge here is going to become important later when we go to shaping the top of the porringer top. So get something that has a concave edge, and you don't have to buy one. You can make one from an old beat up handsaw. You can cut a piece of the steel and just make your own scraper if you don't want to buy one. A hand drill, simple egg beater drill like this, or you can use a gimlet. Twist bit for the hand drill. This is going to be to drill some holes in some glue blocks for screws that we're going to use to attach the top to the base. So you're going to need a screwdriver to attach those screws. And then you're going to need a way to sharpen your tools. So, whatever sharpening method you use. I use oil stones. If you use Scary Sharp, if you use water stones, whatever, but you're going to need a way to keep your tools sharp in use, because we are going to have to stop and sharpen our tools during the process of the build. So there are a few other optional tools that I listed at the bottom of this page, and as I wrote in the suggested tools list, these tools are in no way necessary to build the project. You can build the entire table without any of these tools. What these tools will do is make some of the steps a little easier, maybe a little faster, maybe a little cleaner cutting. But again, in no way do you need these tools. So if you don't have them, don't go out and get them, specifically just for this project. If you do already have them, they may be helpful to you at certain steps. So the first is another back saw. This one is, again, something around 12 to 16 inches. This one is filed cross-cut. Barely any difference between this and the rip-cut saw, except the shape of the teeth, the way the teeth are filed. It's just going to make smoother cross-cuts than a rip-filed saw will. But again, not necessary, just a nice to have. A spoke shave. These are nice for shaping cabriole legs, but again, absolutely not required. We're going to use the rasp and the file. I may use the spoke shave and spots just to demonstrate how it would be used. I may use it for some of the work, but the rasp and the file will do the majority of the shaping on the legs. So again, not a necessary tool, but not bad to have either. A paring gouge. This is something most people probably will not have. A paring gouge, or sometimes called a scribing gouge, or an in-canal gouge. This is a gouge, or it's sort of like a chisel, but it has a curved blade to it, and the bevel is as opposed to a carving gouge or standard out cannel gouge and an in cannel gouge or a paring gouge, the bevel is ground on the inside of the curve. These can be a challenge to sharpen. I did mention, touch on how to sharpen them in part 2 of the sharpening series, so you can go back and take a look at that if you want to know how to sharpen one of these. But again, this isn't a necessary tool for the project. It just may make some of the shaping steps a little bit easier for you. A smooth plane. This is just a short plane set for a fine cut. Not required. You could do the final smoothing with your tri-plane and be absolutely fine. So if you have a smooth plane, fine, use it. If not, don't go out and get it for this project. A skew rabbet plane. Again, I'm going to use this at one point in the project that we'll see later on. But again, not necessary, just a nice to have. The job that I'm going to do with this, you could do with a chisel. So again, not a tool to worry about getting if you don't have it. And finally, a carving gouge. This is going to come in handy during a couple points when we're shaping the top of the table and blending some of the knee in. It may be helpful. So this one is a number 5 in the English pattern. This is a Henry Taylor gouge. This would probably be like a number 4 in the Swiss maids. Something around a number 5 or a number 6, about a 1/2 inch wide. If you have it. Again, not necessary if you don't have it. Just a nice to have if you already do. But don't go out and spend a lot of extra money on these tools because they're not necessary to build the project. So other than that, I think we're pretty much ready to get started. The next time we're going to talk about doing getting the leg stock ready. So if you're planning on building along, you can go out and get your lumber. I'll say one word about lumber. I'm going to be using poplar for this project because it's going to be either painted or dyed. I haven't decided yet, but it needs to match another project that I'm building out of poplar. So I'm going to build it out of the same wood. I like poplar because it's very easy to work with hand tools. It's easy to plane, it's easy to saw, it's easy to chisel. If you want a slightly prettier wood, you could go with something like cherry or walnut, or mahogany would also be nice, and very in line with what would have been used traditionally for a piece like this. I will, as a word of warning, say if you're going to go out and do this out of mahogany, I will suggest you spend the extra money and get real South American or Honduran mahogany, and skip the stuff commonly marketed as African mahogany. You may hear this referred to as kaya or sapelli, and I don't even know if I'm pronouncing those right, but that's how they're spelled. Regardless of how they're spelled, they are very difficult woods to work. They're very stringy, they're very splintery, a lot of reversing ribbon grain, and especially if you don't have a lot of experience hand planing and working hard to work woods, the species sold as African mahogany are not species that I would recommend you start out with, because they're, it's not a terribly hard wood, but because of the interlocked and reversing nature of the grain, they can be very difficult to work. So if you want mahogany, spend the extra money, go with Honduran mahogany. Again, walnut would be nice, cherry would be nice. I would say stay away from really hard woods. Don't build this out of maple, tiger maple. Again, tricky woods to work without a lot of experience working with your hand planes. If you've got experience working these woods, go right ahead. But if you're just starting out, go with a more subdued, easier to work wood like cherry or walnut or true Honduran mahogany. Or you can just build it out of poplar like I'm going to and either paint it or dye it. And both finishes are period accurate. A lot of pieces were built out of secondary woods and either dyed or painted. So it's still true to the period if you're concerned about that. So we're going to need a piece of 4/4. I would suggest something about 8 inches wide. I don't like to work narrow boards. I like to, when I glue up a top for something like this tabletop, I like to do it in no more than 2 boards if I can, so something about 8 inches wide should cover a project the size that I'm going to make. If you're going to scale the table up, you may need to go a little wider on your lumber. So 4/4, 8 inches wide, and maybe 10 feet, just so you have a little extra, 10 or 12 foot board, just so you have a little extra in case something gets screwed up, one of your aprons gets screwed up, or one of the boards for the top gets screwed up. So something about 8 inches wide and maybe 10 to 12 feet long. As for the leg stock, we're going to go with 12/4 stock. And you're probably not going to be able to find this in anything shorter than 8 foot, so you're going to need to get an 8 foot section. But what you can do is get something about 6 inches, 7 inches wide, and we'll rip 2 legs out of one width. So that way we'll use most of the board for the leg stock, and you'll have enough stock left over to make another table if you want, or extra legs if something gets screwed up. So piece of 4/4, about 8 inches wide, 10 to 12 feet long, and a piece of 12/4, about 6 inches wide, 6 to 7 inches wide, and you're probably not going to be able to get it shorter than 8 feet, so an 8 foot piece will be more than enough. And so you can go out, get your lumber, and get it into your shop and let it sit for a couple weeks before we get started, so it has time to acclimate to the shop environment. And in the next episode, we're going to get started on the legs. So I'm excited to get started. Hopefully some of you will build along with me, and I think it's going to be a lot of fun. So come on back next time and we'll get started on the legs. Thanks a lot. We'll see you later.
Thanks for watching.